This week's blog post is the third and final one in my series of illustrations for Fiona Davis's The Magnolia Palace. The first post in the series has more details. Moving on to chapter 10. On the left is Ye, a peasant woman sewing by lamplight. That dates to 1870 to 1872. And on the right are the Gainsborough portraits, which were mentioned once before. This one is Oppener, the ladies Sarah and Catherine Bly, circa 1790. The book mentions a Limoges enamel box, a marriage casket with tea. The most beautiful one is attributed to Colin Nuaille. It's a casket with the heads of Caesars within wreaths, circa 1545. On the right is a cup with Lot and his daughters from the late 16th century by Master I.C. Davis mentions an 18th century bronze bust in the library. The half dozen the Frick owns, I like the one on the left, which is early 18th century. On the right is the Degas oil painting of ballet dancers called The Rehearsal, 1878 to 1879. Holbein's portraits of Thomas More and Cromwell we've seen before. And so we move on to Belvedere Castle in Central Park. This is at the 79th Street transverse in the park. Moving on to chapter 11. This is Giovanni Bellini, St. Francis in the Desert, circa 1475 to 1480. The rabbit that's mentioned is just behind St. Francis's proper right arm. Here he is. The Frick's website offers you a high-resolution image at 36,000 by 20,000 pixels. I wrote a long essay about this painting, published back in 2007. You can find a link to it in the blog post. We've seen Romney's Lady Hamilton as Nature before, in chapter 8. In the center is Rembrandt's self-portrait, 1658. And on the right is Goya's The Forge, circa 1815 to 1820. Joshua Johnson is mentioned as the first documented Black artist in America. His dates are circa 1763 to circa 1824. These are samples of his work. For context, you can see the blog posts on my site about early American paintings at the Worcester Museum of Art. On the left is the Renoir that we've seen already. She mentions a room with earthenware and brilliantly colored ceramics. I don't know the Frick's collection well enough to choose representative examples, so you can go to their website and just search vase or earthenware. Moving on to chapter 15. In the center is Vermeer's Laughing Girl, which we've seen before. And on the right is Sherry Fry's Truth in the pediment of the Frick's facade. Chapter 16. On the left is Sir Thomas Lawrence, Girl with a Blue Stone on a Gold Chain. That's his Miss Louisa Murray, painted sometime after 1827. The Rembrandt self-portrait is the one that we just saw, and the Degas we also just saw. On the left is El Greco's St. Jerome, which we've seen before in chapter 8. And on the right is Manet, The Bullfight, 1864. The Frick's Pittsburgh mansion was called Clayton, and it was the family's primary residence from 1883 to 1905, and it is still standing. Moving on to chapter 17. On the left is the fountain inside the Frick collection, and on the right is a picture of the Frick Art Reference Library's reading room, which is a fabulous place to work if you ever have the excuse. Moving on to chapter 18, we mentioned the Fragonard room much earlier in chapter 2, and we mentioned Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney in chapter 7. Chapter 23, the Sherry Fry sculpture on the Frick's pediment is mentioned again. That was first mentioned in chapter 2. There is also mention of a sculpture of Lillian staring up into the distance with her arms slightly lifted and one foot stepping forward. I assume this is a figment of Fiona Davis's brilliant imagination because I cannot think of any sculpture that matches it. A few more comments on Audrey Munson. If you've read the notes at the end of the book, you know that Audrey Munson was the basis for Lillian in the Magnolia Palace, although their stories diverge quite sharply. On the left is a bust of Audrey as Audrey, not as an allegorical figure. It is the work of Daniel Chester French, one of the great American sculptors of the early 20th century. The bust is on display at French's home and studio, Chesterwood, in Western Massachusetts. And you can see it tucked away here. We do not actually know how many sculptures Audrey Munson posed for. Artists don't necessarily tell the world which models they used for a particular work. And as Lillian says in the book, an artist often used a model for the pose but changed his or her facial features. If you go to Wikipedia, you can find a color-coded list of possible, probable, and impossible works that Munson modeled for. Aside from the Strauss Memorial, which we looked at in Chapter 1, the sculptures include Piccirilli's Fireman's Memorial, 1913, which is at the far left. Piccirilli also did the main monument, 1913, and used Audrey as the model. Daniel Chester French used her for his Continents, Customs House at Bowling Green. At the upper right is America from the Continents. And Daniel Chester French also used Audrey for Manhattan and Brooklyn from 1916. Those were created for the east end of the Manhattan Bridge. They're now in front of the Brooklyn Museum. There's a lot of writing about Audrey Munson on the net. I suggest you start with the essay on the New England Historical Society's website because it's one of the least sensational. Frick Madison closed down on March the 3rd, 2024. By late 2024, the Frick collection will, we hope, be open again on East 70th Street in its renovated and expanded home. You can go to the URL on the screen to find out where they're at with the renovation. If you're interested in outdoor sculpture in New York City, I have an illustrated chronological list of every outdoor sculpture up to 2021 on my Instagram account, whose URL is there on the screen. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.